Mr. Commissioner, we are commencing the recreational fishing portion of our hearings. Before we do, there was one item of business to address quickly in relation to an exhibit late in the day yesterday. Mr. Tyzek put, and it's on the screen now, Mr. Tyzek put to Mr. Morley this document, the 2004, along with some other year in review reports. This one, we, in our haste to conclude, was not marked as an exhibit. I'd suggest it should become an exhibit now, please.
Exhibit number 510.
Thank you.
We're getting a feedback? No. Thank you.
The witnesses today, Mr. Commissioner, are Devona Adams, Deborah Snedden, and Joe Tady. And what I'll look to do is take a moment by way of introduction to cover a few things, and then I'll ask that they be affirmed as a panel today. Our approach for the recreational fishing hearings in some ways is similar to the commercial fishing hearings, which have largely concluded. There will be some documents that I'll be taking these witnesses to, which will be fairly quick. It is to ensure they are part of the record rather than asking witnesses to review them in detail through their testimony, at least in my questions. We have made a decision relatively this week, I think it was, to combine these three witnesses. We initially had Ms. Adams and Ms. Snedden as a first panel and Mr. Tady as a separate panel. We've since rejigged, if you will, and have put them all together. I think that'll be a more efficient way to proceed. The second component to these are three people from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans today. The second component to this evidence on recreational fishing will be a panel on Monday of three gentlemen with significant experience in the recreational fishery. The first item of business is to ask that the policy and practice report on recreational salmon fishing, licensing, management, and related issues, that please be marked, I suppose not as an exhibit, but as a policy and practice report, or PPR formally.
It'll be PPR number 7.
And as with other PPRs, the approach Commission Council will take is to use that as the context and background and to presume it is accurate unless we have situations where Council or participants identify corrections or concerns to it. I'll have some questions of that nature today where I'll be asking some of these witnesses for comments or corrections to the PPR. My expectation at a general level is that the report is basically accurate with relatively smaller clarifications. I should also advise I'll be working from the exhibit list for this portion of our hearings, and as I go through questions, I'll be referring to the exhibit list, and that will also reflect tabs in the binders that these witnesses have, so that may assist them as well. If I could ask, please, Mr. Registrar, these witnesses be affirmed.
You solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you for this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
State your name, please.
Devona Adams.
Deborah Snedden.
Joe Tady.
Thank you. Counsel?
And just for the sake of the record, Ms. Snedden, I'll just perhaps confirm through you. Your legal name is Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, and yet you also use Deborah, D-E-B-R-A, so we may see both on some of the documents. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
And my suggestion, if you're agreeable, is that for the commission purposes, we might use your formal legal name, the longer one.
That's fine, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to start by way of background very briefly. Number 2 on the exhibit list is the CV for Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams, you recognize that as your CV?
Yes, I do.
If that could please be marked as an exhibit.
Exhibit 511.
Next, number 3 on the exhibit list. Ms. Snedden, that's your CV?
Yes, it is.
If that could please be marked as an exhibit.
512.
And jumping ahead to number 28 on the exhibit list, Mr. Tady, expect you'll see your CV there.
Yes, that's mine.
And if I could ask that please be marked as an exhibit.
513.
I will move quickly to summarize your backgrounds, and I'll do this by way of a long-winded leading question, but welcoming you to correct anything I have wrong. Ms. Adams, first you studied fish, wildlife and recreation at BCIT, the BC Institute of Technology, and then started with the DFO in 1985. I understand that you have worked continually with the department since, that you've been involved with ground fish and salmon, and with both the recreational and commercial fishery, including significant experience doing consultations with stakeholders. In 1996, I understand you took the position as resource manager for the Fraser River, and in 2005 you moved to Vancouver head office, and your current position is regional recreational fishery coordinator. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Sneddon, for your part, you attended Simon Fraser University, worked in Toronto with the tax department, and in 1992 returned to this province and started working with the DFO licensing unit. I understand that you worked your way up in licensing to become the head of that unit, and in recent years have been involved in managing the recreational fishery in the Lower Fraser area.
Yes, that's correct.
I'll pause to ask you if you could please briefly explain what the Lower Fraser area includes. What does that refer to?
Right, the Lower Fraser area is a geographical area that includes the Lower Mainland, the Fraser River area up to and including Sawmill Creek, which is just past Yale. It includes Howe Sound, Indian Arm, Squamish, Pemberton, and the freshwater systems on the Sunshine Coast, and it includes part of the ocean area outside of the mouth of the Fraser River, halfway through Georgia Strait.
Thank you. And I take it that since September of 2010, you've been in an acting assignment as program coordinator for the Lower Fraser Resource Management?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Tatey, you have a BSc degree in biology from Simon Fraser University. In 1994, you began doing contract work for the DFO related to stock assessment, in particular of Lake Stewart sockeye. And in 1996, I understand you were hired as a senior technician in the department's stock assessment, the DFO stock assessment's Chinook and Coho program, and that you later became the stock assessment biologist for that program. Is that accurate?
Yes.
In 2004, and since 2004, you've acted as the program head and biologist for the Chinook and Coho program. You've spent time as a management biologist in the Lower Fraser area related to Chinook, Coho, and Chum. And in 2008, you took on your current role as the program head / biologist, Chum, Pink, and Recreational Fisheries program.
Yes.
And your current position has you responsible for the recreational creel surveys for salmon fisheries in the Lower Fraser River.
Yes.
Great. I'll start with some general questions. I can advise the witnesses I'll be focusing my questions first on Ms. Adams and Ms. Sneddon, and then turning later to the question of creel surveys, where the questions will be directed at Mr. Tatey. But addressing all witnesses at that point. By way of some questions about the overview of the recreational fishery, and witnesses, please take as a given that anything you can do to tie this back to Fraser sockeye as opposed to salmon generally is appreciated, but that's some of my questions will be general. This is a general one, and Ms. Adams, I'd like to ask if you could describe the place of recreational fishing in this province as opposed to other parts of Canada.
Just until recently, the Pacific coast of Canada's marine recreational fishery was and still remains the largest marine fishery in the country, and it's significant in terms of the number of participants and also the number of angler days and economic analysis related to that, the input.
And salmon, could you comment on salmon fishing within the recreational fishery in this province?
Salmon fishing in the recreational fisheries has been the backbone since the late 1800s, and recently we've seen a shift due to declining salmon stocks to other species such as halibut, crab, rockfish, prawns and other non-salmon species, but salmon still remains the critical backbone of the recreational fishing community in both marine and in freshwater.
And for both the marine and freshwater salmon fishing, could you give us a sense of where that recreational fishing takes place?
You're asking specifically with regards to sockeye?
I think it makes sense to make that a Fraser sockeye question, if you will.
Okay, I would focus then on southern BC, and in southern BC, the area from Mission to Hope in the Fraser River is an area that we consider to be a moderate to high impact fishery. For the rest of southern BC, with the exception of Barkley Sound, we would consider the fishery to be low to moderate, basically low impact fisheries in those areas when we look at the overall scope of sockeye activity in southern BC.
And with respect to the in-river fishery for sockeye and the policy and practice report, I don't need to go there on the screen, but it talks about that fishery, and I understand that it was reopened in the mid-1990s, and that can be a very significant fishery, a lot of activity.
Yes, I spent many years working in groundfish fisheries and offshore fisheries, and in '96 I had the opportunity to move to the Fraser River, and at that time there was just the beginnings of a sockeye fishery in the Fraser River, and since that time it has developed. It's very dependent on the abundance of sockeye available in the system at the time.
Ms. Sneddon, you work in this, you know this area well, and I'd like to ask you what with a concentration of activity in the Fraser River, in particular in the area around Chilliwack, let's say, could you give us a sense of what that looks like and whether there are problems that arise from lots of people fishing at one time?
Right, so the Lower Fraser area being so close to the Greater Vancouver area can generate a lot of interest and activity on the river. The Mission to Hope area has a number of access points when it's low water in the middle of summer, when sockeye are going through, where people can actually walk out to the river, which allows more anglers to access the fishery. In the early part of the year, when we're fishing for Chinook, if you did an overflight on a weekend day, you could see anywhere from 100 to 300 people. But during a sockeye fishery, when there's a lot of abundance of sockeye, you could see on an overflight 1,500 people. So a lot of people coming onto the river, small access points. There's only 2 or 3 boat launches, so a lot of concentration in small areas, and smaller. The fishing areas that are out there are fairly small once you get onto the river. There's a bar that you can fish, and if you get 1,500 people out there, you can generally see a couple hundred on a bar, and that can lead to conflict both between themselves and then with other fishing activity taking place on the river, like drift net fishing with the First Nations. There can be conflict between the 2 user groups.
And without getting into great detail, could you give us a sense of steps that have been taken to address what you've just described, conflict on the river?
Yeah, there's been, and it's not really a recent phenomena, but back when Devona was the manager in the Fraser, she did start a dialogue group between First Nations and recreational anglers in the area. It didn't. It started off. It didn't get a lot of traction, but in recent years, it has certainly been reinvigorated. There was an incident a couple years ago where one of the chiefs, the chief of the Chehalis band, was shot by a person recreationally angling. I wouldn't call him a recreational angler, and that generated a lot of dialogue between the two sectors, because everyone felt that behavior was not acceptable, and they wanted to see what they could do to reduce conflict. So they've reinvigorated this dialogue session between the First Nations and recreational anglers. There's been a lot of participation in the meetings. They meet monthly. They have developed a River Manners video as well as pamphlets, and they've done a lot of work in educating through both going out personally and putting it on YouTube, and through tackle shops and trying to educate people, as well as through the different bands, trying to explain what goes on in a recreational fishery, trying to dispel some myths and to try and build common ground so they can move forward and work together.
Ms. Adams, could you comment briefly on the demographics of the recreational sector?
I'm assuming that's for the sockeye fishery.
That makes sense. To do it
Yes.
that way.
In the Fraser River area, generally it's predominated by male participants, and generally in the 45 to 65-year-old age category. It's a very mixed composition of ethnicities, and there are more and more families participating in the fishery. I would say, as Deb mentioned, on when the water is low, a lot of the participants will take their families out on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and possibly a holiday Monday to have a family fishing activity where they'll camp right on the river bar, and they will participate in sockeye and Chinook fishing and have a family outing. So there are children involved and women involved, but I would say the predominant participants are males. And generally they're British Columbians. We have seen Albertans participate, and also some Washington states just south of the border participating in the fishery as well. Very few international participants, because there's no guarantees on whether that fishery will happen, and people coming from the UK or other parts of Europe will not book a holiday based on an activity in that area, because it's a gamble whether it'll happen or not.
Year to year, they may not, they can't say with any certainty whether there will be an opening.
That's correct.
In a brief way, if you could help us to get a sense from, let's say, 2007 to present, what sort of a fishery there has been for sockeye, for Fraser sockeye, by recreational fishers.
Okay, so as Devona points out, it is definitely a very sporadic opportunity. So if we're talking 2007 we did not see much in the way of sockeye returns, and we did not have a total allowable catch that allowed for recreational opportunities. So there was no opportunity in 2007. In 2008, there was, again, not a lot of total allowable catch, or TAC, but it did allow an opportunity, and I believe it was for 3 days in the marine waters and 5 days in the Fraser River itself in early September. In 2009, there was no fishery because of low abundance of sockeye and no total allowable catch. And in 2010, we had, I think it was about 35 days of fishing. So very variable fishing opportunities.
And you don't need the precise dates, but was that a start in August in 2010? July or August? But
yeah, it was early
months?
August. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to move to some questions about licensing and license fees. I'll direct these to you, Ms. Adams. The policy and practice report describes licenses, and what I'll do is take that as read, if you will, and move to some specific questions. One of them is whether are there ever suspensions of recreational licenses?
For recreational fisheries, we do not have a process for suspensions, but I am aware that through some prosecutions, license holders have had their boats seized, their gear seized, and they have been prohibited from participating in the recreational fishery for any variable time period. So through the courts, yes, but through the Department of Fisheries, no.
And if I can just rephrase that and see if I have it right, for example, that would mean that a person might have a court-imposed prohibition on fishing, but if they were to apply for or fill out the paperwork for a recreational license, there's nothing in the system that would stop them from being issued the paper. They might be in breach of the court order, but there's no, am I right that there's no screening that goes on at that point?
That's correct. Our fishery officers do have access to the licensing information, and they would probably check, if they came upon a person, they would check to make sure that those persons did not have a court-imposed order to prohibiting them from participating. But it's not something that's upfront in our licensing system.
And without taking you through the licensing system for recreational fishers, at a general level, how well do you think the system works?
I think in the 21st century, with the electronic technology, we could move to more of an electronic licensing system. Right now, 20% of our licenses are sold through an electronic process. The other 80% are sold by paper They're paper copies, and they're distributed through many vendors, Canadian Tire, Joe's Fish and Tackle Shop, gas stations up in Hunter Mile House, like through local community, people who distribute them. But I know our colleagues in the province of BC went to an electronic licensing system almost 100%. I don't think it's completely 100%, but probably 4 or 5 years ago they went to 100%, near 100% online licensing. And I think that provides a lot of really good resourcing, and it also makes it more accessible to some of the participants. Not all of them, not all of our aging male participants have computer access, but I think we're seeing a trend towards people doing things electronically, and I think that would be a step in the right direction.
In your discussions and the feedback that you get from those in the recreational sector, are there specific concerns around the licensing process, or does it seem to be fairly well accepted?
I would say it's very well accepted. It started in the early 1980s. We had some changes in the late 80s, and our last changes for our licensing system were in the mid-90s. And I know there's other countries in the world that don't have any licensing, so I think we're in pretty good shape. Can we make it better? Absolutely.
And the one example you gave about moving to an electronic system, are there other improvements that you would suggest?
One of the things we've been exploring with our science staff is our quest to improve catch monitoring. We'd like to use the electronic licensing system as a database for a sample and a study so take a representative random sample of our participants through that on a fairly regular basis, and we are doing that right now through our 2010 national survey. We've pulled 12,000 licenses, combination of paper copies and electronic copies, and we're doing comparisons on that to see if there's any biases in our samples from using the electronic database versus the paper database. So I think that's where we really want to move towards, is using it for other purposes, like getting input into our fisheries management, but also our catch accounting programs.
And just so I'm clear, is the 2010 survey you referred to, am I right that that's part of the 5-year national recreational male surveys?
That's correct. It's currently underway right now. As of the close of 2010, we started issuing questionnaires to 12,000 participants throughout Canada and internationally.
With respect to license fees, am I right, Ms. Adams, that the entirety of the fees from licenses, both fishing and federal recreational licenses, but also conservation stamps, goes into general revenue? Is that your understanding?
So for access to tidal water fishing in British Columbia, we have a flat access fee, a license fee. We have an annual license. We have a 1-day, 3-day, and 5-day license, and the revenues from that go directly into general revenue. And we also have a salmon stamp for those participants who choose to retain a salmon. They must have affixed to their license a salmon stamp. And a portion of that salmon stamp, a very small portion, a stamp is around $6. $1 of it goes to the Pacific Salmon Foundation through a funding arrangement.
We have, and I think the policy and practice report refers to the view of some in the recreational sector that there should be an increase to the fees for recreational licenses contingent on the money not disappearing, if you will, into general revenue, but going over to, for example, monitoring or other recreational programs. Could you comment on that? First of all, am I right that that's something that's been advanced by, I presume, the SFAB, the Sport Fishing Advisory Board?
Yes, for the past several years, the Sport Fishing Advisory Board, which represents the recreational fishers in British Columbia, have expressed an interest in increasing license fees to go directly into improvements for catch accounting and also salmon enhancement production. And
is there a current process for considering a fee review or a fee increase? Is there a fee review underway now, or any active process to your knowledge within the department?
There's no specific fee review underway for recreational fisheries. There are certainly staff, including myself in the department, that are looking at ways that we could get more revenues from license fees and or stamps to help us with our catch accounting programs and the costs of doing those programs. And one of the areas is proposing it to the users through the User Fee Act process or possibly Treasury Board.
And the User Fees Act, I take it, is maybe somewhat of a hurdle to increasing the fees. At least it would slow down that process significantly.
Yes, the User Fee Act, my understanding is it went in place in the mid-2000s, and there's been very few federal government departments that have been successful in getting user fees through that. I think three groups have tried, three departments have tried. We're in the process of examining how we might go about proceeding through an application through the User Fee Act to get fees for the recreational fishery and direct that monies towards improvements in catch monitoring. But there's no guarantees that the money would go back into those specific programs. We would have to work through Treasury Board to get those funds redirected to catch monitoring. So the recreational community is very nervous. Yes, they support having increased fees for catch accounting and salmon enhancement production, but to have it go into general revenue concerns them.
What's your view on the merits of a fee increase for recreational licenses?
I think a marginal increase would certainly be warranted given the cost of running programs, particularly catch monitoring. I think there's also a very fine line of a breaking point where our participants will choose to go golfing or they will choose to participate in other outdoor activities. And we've seen that through the national survey and also through our programs that we're seeing the number of anglers, licensed anglers, decreasing. From the early 1990s, we had about 480,000 tidal water licenses issued. Just this past year, we had 290,000 licensed. So there's been a significant drop since the early 90s. And so the cost of the license is a factor in where people make their choices about their outdoor recreation activities.
And I should, because we're proceeding on the footing that the PPR gives us the context, I haven't asked questions about the distinction between federal and provincial licenses that are issued, but I take it the numbers you've described refer to the licenses that are issued for tidal water fisheries, which wouldn't reflect what's going on, for example, in the river upstream of the Mission Bridge.
That's correct.
I'm going to ask Mr. Lund that number 4 from our exhibit list please be brought up. Your attention, this is prepared, Ms. Adams, by you and Paul Ryle. It says at the bottom, it doesn't seem to have a date on it, but the second bullet, if you will, under background, the recreational sector believes they are currently contributing more revenue to the federal government than the service cost provided to their sector. The annual license fee reviews from approximately 325,000 tidal water recreational licenses, including license fees and stamp, are approximately 6.5 million. And then under the key messages at the bottom, DFO is committed to working with the SFAB on this initiative. DFO will review current resources and make adjustments where necessary. This, I take it, this describes that SFAB perspective on contributing, really a perspective that they are contributing more by way of fees and stamp money than the services that they're receiving.
We started engaging with the recreational community in 2005 and 6 to look at how we might go about obtaining additional funding through the license fee and or a stamp. And that money is going directly into catch monitoring programs. One of the things the recreational community asked the department was, what are your current costs and expenditures and revenues? And so a colleague of mine and I were asked to go through national, regional headquarters and area staff in a very general terms to determine what our current expenditures are for the various programs. So in 2005, we determined that the department was receiving somewhere between $6 and $7 million in license fees and stamps from marine licenses, and that we were spending in the neighborhood of $15 million in all our program costs directly related to the recreational fishery. The bulk of the $15 million expenditures that we assessed were related to salmon enhancement. The next big fee was staff time and overhead related, and the other piece was catch accounting. So just from that quick math, the recreational community said, well, the Department of Fisheries, the Government of Canada, is receiving between $6 and $7 million through fees, and you're spending $15 million. Approximately 50% of the department's expenditures are being funded through the recreational license fees, and they felt and made a statement at that time, and I don't know that it's been validated or verified, that they didn't feel, in their opinion, that there was any other fishing sector group that was funding 50% of the program costs related to their fishery.
Thank you. And all indeed, first, before I leave this document, I'd ask this please be marked as an exhibit.
Exhibit number 514.
And Ms. Adams, I'll go to number 8 on the exhibit list, because I think when you were referring to the $15 million figure, could you describe what this is, please, once it's flipped over? There we are. Is that, am I right in guessing that that reflects the figure at the bottom right?
Yes, yes, this is the document I was referring to. It was very draft. Some of the recreational participants that we presented this to did not agree with some of the calculations, but this was our best estimate at the time of where our expenditures were and the revenues that we had.
And it's very hard to read, but if I have it right, it has in the upper left 20 March 06. Does that seem to be when this was prepared?
Yes.
In March of 2006?
Yes. And it was draft, and it was certainly was not a very sharpened pencil, but a very rough look at where our expenditures and revenues were.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
515.
Number 7 in the list of exhibits, just to round out this question and the record on the matter of revenue arising from recreational fees. This is the Pacific Region Stats. It's entitled Comparison of the Tidal Water Sports Fishing Database and National Recreational Online System is what it's entitled. And it seems to give us numbers from the 1999-2000 season to present, to 2011, but as of a certain date. Is that accurate?
Yes, this is accurate, and I understand, this is to December 24th. I have received information that the revenues for all licenses for the completion of 2010 was in the neighborhood of $5.9 million.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
516.
I'm going to move to, Ms. Adams, I'm going to keep you in the hot seat, if you will, but ask you about the Tidal Waters Sport Fishing Guide. And again, taking as background what is set out in the policy.
Sorry, could I add something to Devona's testimony before we move on? So we talked about license fees and increases in license fees. So the department and the recreational community have been looking at not just increases to license fees for catch monitoring, but there's been a number of proposals from other areas that like sturgeon, like halibut, and catch monitoring. So we have a bunch of people looking for money and looking for the department to increase license fees for these different programs. So it's not just catch monitoring. And so we're trying to look at a holistic way of putting all of the information we need into one license fee increase. But again, it's not just a fee just for catch monitoring that we're looking at. So that is a challenge for us. The other challenge is with the User Fee Act, and when it came into place, In order to make an argument to Treasury Board that we need the money to go directly to programs, part of our problem is the department runs a deficit every year. And so it would be highly unlikely we'd be able to convince Treasury Board that any additional funding should go directly towards a program versus the department's deficit. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, I appreciate that. With respect to the sport fishing guides, number 5 on our list of exhibits, you'll recognize this. The 2009 to 2011 BC Tidal Water Sport Fishing Guide, is that right, Ms. Adams?
Yes, that's correct.
This could be marked as an exhibit, please. And to complete the record, this, when one flips it over, up on a printed version, flips it upside down, the back half of the document will provide what's set out at tab 6 of the, or number 6 on the list of exhibits, the British Columbia Freshwater Salmon Supplement.
Yes, just to clarify, the federal government is responsible for managing all marine fisheries and fishers in those activities, and the province of BC, and we also manage salmon and freshwater. The rest of the freshwater fisheries are managed by the province of BC and licensed by the province of BC.
And so the province, just to be clear on that, the province handles licensing for the in-river, the non-tidal fishery, but the management falls to the DFO?
Only for salmon in freshwater.
For salmon, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item number 5 will be marked as 517.
I'm sorry, thank you. And number 6, the freshwater salmon supplement, if I could ask that become an exhibit, please. Thank you, Mr. Giles. Ms. Adams, at a general level, these guides, and in particular, I'll ask that the other one be brought up, please, the Tidal Waters Guide. Thank you. Is it fair to say that this guide is one of the primary means for the department to communicate with anglers?
It is one of the primary guides for communicating with anglers for everything except for salmon. And the reason being, as you can see there, it's a 2-year guide, and salmon predictions come out every year. And so what you'll find in there for a lot of the dynamic salmon, like Chinook and coho and sockeye, you will find in the opportunities section of the guide, opportunities expected or opportunities will be announced because of this 2-year publication and also the dynamic nature of salmon fishing in this province.
So is it the case that there may be other fisheries where the ground rules set out in the guide can apply for a 2-year period relatively safely, whereas I think what you're describing with salmon is you can't set rules in advance for any length of time? That's
correct, and it's not just about the species-specific information that we provide in here. We also provide information around species at risk programs, marine mammal programs, different ecosystem aspects. So there's more than just us saying you're allowed to go sockeye fishing in the Fraser during these times and these are your limits. It's a very comprehensive document, and those types of pieces of information do not change. They're what we call static and core.
Thank you. Ms. Sneddon, you had a comment?
Yeah, in addition, this the guide actually outlines, what are the points to remember when you go salmon fishing? What's legal and what's illegal? What's the gear type? Those types of things generally don't change in the 2-year period. It's just that whether it's open or not might.
That's helpful. And Ms. Sneddon, I take it you're one of the key authors of this guide?
Yes, I am. I did this version and the one that's coming out in 2 weeks from now.
Oh, well, we should have waited another 2 weeks, I suppose.
That's it.
But we'll carry on. That was one of my questions, and maybe to get a sense of how much this document changes year to year and what remains generally the same, I'd like to move at this fairly quickly, but I'll ask you, Ms. Sneddon, these questions. Within this exhibit, page 4, and Mr. Lunn, I'll provide ringtail numbers, page 9. It's 5 numbers off, if you will. So page 9 of 91 on the screen, of unlawful actions. This is a way of communicating regulations that govern the recreational fishery?
Yes, that is correct.
On the next page, you'll see reference to the observe, record, and report line, which encourages people to report violations.
Yeah, that's that is the information for observe, record, report. Yeah.
On page 14, Mr. Lunn, which is page 8 of the guide, the SFAB Code of Conduct is reproduced there, and lower in the page, catch and release techniques to remember.
Yes, right. The department and the Sport Fish Advisory Board were definitely concerned around fishing behavior and wanting to make sure that people were fishing responsibly, so they developed this code of conduct, and a number of years ago it was included in the guide and continues to remain in there, and is one of our tools that we use when talking to anglers on the river and with behavior issues.
And some of the points under the catch and release techniques are relevant to selective fishing, and I'll return to selective fishing a little later in my questions. But if I could just confirm, am I right to say that these techniques to remember are not regulations, they're not requirements, it's guidance and advice?
Yes, that is correct. By regulation, what we can say is that it is illegal to or that you must release in the least harmful manner any fish you do not intend to keep. That's our regulation. The rest is, techniques and points to remember.
Mr. Lunn, on page 18, which is page 12 of the guide, this gives some more specific information relevant to salmon and really, I suppose, sets out a checklist of things that the angler should remember before heading off fishing: to purchase a license and stamp, requirement about barbless hooks, checking to see if the fishery is open, etc. Is that right?
Yeah, this section is trying to make sure that people read this before they go out, they know what the rules are, and it provides in a fairly small area what the information is. But in the next version, I've gotten a lot of advice from recreational anglers and from fishery officers and DFO staff that it's just a little bit convoluted, and so we've worked on some of the wording and we've set it out in a different manner. So here's the points to remember about gear, here's the points to remember about areas, here's, we've laid it out a little bit easier, and it's a constant evolution. We did this with the last version. We're doing it this one. We take feedback from anybody who's willing to help us make this a more readable and usable guide for recreational anglers.
And at a basic level, it's unrealistic to expect that your average angler will head into the Canadian regulations and study them. This is how you're trying to communicate and ensure that people know what they should and shouldn't be doing.
Yes, that is correct. The regulations, not the easiest things to find, and fairly dry reading, so this is much better.
No comment. On the next page, you'll see there's a picture at the bottom of the next page of the circle hook, and there's a discussion there which I won't read out, but it talks about the department preparing a regulatory submission about the possibility of requiring circle hooks. Why don't I first ask, what would circle hooks, they're referred to here as being at the bottom of that paragraph, a valuable conservation tool in certain fisheries?
This, we did some studies in the late 90s when we had some coho concerns, and we were looking at the difference of the impacts on fish, particularly in freshwater, with using a J hook, which is a traditional fishing hook, versus a circle hook, which has been used in commercial fisheries for many years. And what we found was that with J hooks, coho in particular would deeply ingest the hook, and it would cause internal damage, and that was when they were using bait. With the circle hook, we found there was less mortality in the fish or on the fish because the fish was generally hooked in the mouth. And the recreational community asked the department to proceed with having a regulation change of allowing circle hooks in the sport fishing regulations. We proceeded, and it has met a couple of challenges just with a tabling of a revised Fisheries Act to different reviews with standing committee, and we still have it on the books to go forward, but we're waiting for some processes that are unfolding.
You'd like to see that change made?
I think it would be an important addition to the regulations. I don't think it's just specific to helping the sockeye fishery in the Fraser. I think it could be used in a number of different fisheries and areas, but it's not something I think we would look at being the magic solution for sockeye fishing in the Fraser.
Ms. Sneddon, continuing in the guide, and I won't do this in any detail, if we have a look at the next page, we'll see an example of that, and there's a general description and then more detailed description for particular areas, for the title of fishing areas and particular species. And this starts with the discussing salmon. But this, and then if we flip ahead, Mr. Lund, to page 42, number 36, page 36 in the guide, I take it this is a section which goes through the different, and have a look at one page on, please. Closures by area. So I take it these are ways of communicating basic information about what the closures are and what rules apply in a particular area.
Yes, that is correct. So, for example, if you look on that first page on the salmon table, it says that in all areas, it's the first line of the table, page 14,
which is page 20 of the document on ringtail.
Okay, so it says for all areas for Chinook from January 1 to January 31st, it's open at 2 per day, except the tidal portion of the Fraser River. But you may go to page 46, I think it was, you were just on, the closure section. And
Page
when you
36 of the guide and page, I'm sorry to give everyone two numbers, 42 of the document. Thanks.
There it says under areas 1, 101, and 142, it says all fin fish, including salmon, if you're fishing in the tidal portion of the stream, you must have a single barbless hook. So you do need to read the two in conjunction. They're not standalone documents or parts of the document.
Thank you. Just to complete the quick review of this, page 59, Mr. Lunn, is page 53 of the guide. And this is a color guide when it's printed and circulated to people.
Yes, it is. And again, this is one of the pieces we've revamped this year is that, we've the sections were outlined, tables, closures, and species ID. And so this year we've moved it around a little bit and we've put, here's the table for salmon, here's the information for salmon, here's the species ID for salmon. And we've moved it together just so it's a little bit easier for people to read. But that is our ID. We also have in the freshwater section the species ID for what the fish look like when they're in freshwater.
The fact that the guide is published for a 2-year period, I understand has been criticized by some because for salmon in particular, it may be the case that as soon as they're actually printed, it's out of date in a sense or doesn't accurately set out the information. I don't know, first of all, is that inevitably the case, and are there specific things that can be done to address that problem or challenge?
I wouldn't say that the document is out of date. I would say there's pieces of the document that are definitely not even out of date. They're subject to change. And we try to address that in the guide by saying to be announced or to be determined. So they do not mean the same thing, those terminology. If to be announced means we're pretty sure there's going to be a fishery, so we don't know what the dates are yet, but it's going to come up. If it's to be determined, we don't really know yet. We don't have a forecast, or there's some uncertainty, so those parts, that's fisheries management. You cannot always predict what's going to happen. With the rest of the information generally doesn't change. The gear hasn't changed that much over years. The species ID doesn't change that much. But we also, when we run out of guides, usually year one into it, we do a reprint. And at that point, if there are major errors or things we want to correct or change, we do that at that time as well. We also have an additional tool for communicating with the public, and that is the fishery notice system. So when there is a change to the guide, we do what's called a fishery notice, and it does go out to a wide audience of people who have either signed up or who issue licenses, and through the department staff, and then it's broadly distributed to anglers that we have access to.
Ms. Adams?
I would also just add that we're also exploring opportunities to move into the technology age of having applications with the guide so that people could have it in a real time. And also there are challenges with that given the geography of the province of BC in terms of receiving that information, but it would certainly be another option.
Mm-hmm. And I'll return to fishery notices. Why don't I move towards the question generally of managing the recreational fishery, and we'll try to focus on Fraser sockeye where we can. At a general level, though, is it fair to say that the blunt tool or the basic tool for management is to open or close the fishery?
Yeah, that definitely is the blunt tool, open and close.
What other types of tools are available to managers?
Well, we can determine whether or not, what the size limit is, first off. There's a minimum size limit. Sometimes there's a maximum in other species, not sockeye specifically, but size limits, there is daily limits. Sometimes people refer to that as a bag limit, but that's really a hunting term. There, in fishing, it is a daily limit. There is a possession limit, which is generally 2 times your daily limit. That tries to account for people that are out on a holiday for more than 1 day and want to have a daily limit when they're traveling home. So we have a possession limit. We have again, not specific to sockeye, but I'll just mention it, is whether it's a marked or unmarked fish, meaning a hatchery fish or not. We have...
Well,
Yeah, Devona or Joe can jump in. There's a number of tools. So open and closing a particular area. So we may open one area versus another.
Mr. Tatey.
Oh, I was just going to add to a retention or non-retention as well. So most of what we've been describing here, going back to, I probably should have mentioned it, and maybe brought this up then, was when Deb was referring to when the sockeye fishery was opened during the years. That was the retention part of the sockeye fishery she was referring to. So people were still fishing, but they couldn't retain any sockeye they caught.
That would be a catch and release opening, so to speak. All right. Are there ever limits placed on the number of licenses issued? I suppose as context, we've heard some description of the commercial fishery as being a limited entry fishery where there aren't new licenses issued per se. But does that ever happen in the recreational context?
You're asking, sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it wasn't very clear. The question is whether there would ever be a situation where the DFO would say, no, there are no more licenses, we've reached the maximum for recreational fishers.
The department has not taken that approach to date. I think I wouldn't see that happening. What we found actually, as I mentioned earlier, is the license sales have decreased significantly in the last 20 years, from 480,000 down to 280,000. I believe the public policy on it is that it's public access fishery, and those British Columbians or visitors who choose to participate in that fishery can do so and can get a license to participate in the fishery, similar to driver's licenses. There's no limit on driver's licenses in British Columbia or in Canada, and folks who want to drive have to go through the tests and get the licensing and proceed.
I'd like to bring up number 9, please, on the exhibit list. Ms. Adams, this is an email exchange with a fellow named Frank Stager. I may be mispronouncing the name, from the Fraser River Fishing Lodge. I'm asking this just to get an understanding of the challenges and the criticism that can arise when there's a closure. So I'll just take you to the bottom of the first page. This is from August 11, 2007. We've received the last notice from DFO with the indication of closing the Fraser River or parts of the Fraser River for recreational fishing. We are sold out for salmon fishing with 22 direct jobs on the line. If the river is closing, we have to lay off most of our staff as a direct result. Jumping ahead in one page over, the second paragraph, we kill a ridiculously low number of salmon per guest. On average 1 salmon per 2 guests. The rest is catch and release. The impact of a closure would be a disaster for all of us. I don't need to have you comment on the specifics of that, but could you comment more generally about the impact of a closure and the sorts of the problems or the consequences that arise?
In both freshwater and marine water recreational fisheries, there is an element of visitors to the province of British Columbia, and they book their holidays like any of us do, probably 6 months in advance, if not earlier, because they're incurring flights, different modes of travel to get there. They need to book accommodation, and they want to make sure they have the proper licensing in place. Similar to commercial fisheries, when opportunities don't happen that they have an expectation that will, they ask us for refunds on their licenses, they ask us for refunds on their plane ride that they took to come from Germany, and they ask us for refunds on hotels. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous. You're dealing with a natural resource, and the conservation of the resource takes precedent as well as our legal obligations. And we communicate that as staff to the recreational fishing community, particularly related to sockeye fisheries, because of the dynamic nature of the returns and the test fishing information that we're getting. So there's no guarantees on this, and we, as mentioned in my response to this letter, we have conservation concerns and legal obligations that precede others having opportunities. There are folks that I would say do not accept that. They simply don't accept that in the recreational community and in other fisheries as well.
I'll ask a question in a moment to follow up. I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 519.
With respect to this, then, I take from that, Ms. Adams, anticipating that you'll face unhappiness or criticism, one of the things that you look to do is to reach out and communicate in advance to set expectations. Is that right?
Yes, I would say in my experience, in my work with the Department of Fisheries, we do extensive consultations with, and I'll just speak specifically to the recreational fisheries because that's what we're speaking about today, and we're doing a number of different ways of communicating with them, pre-season, in-season, post-season, and Deb can probably add some more specifics related to the Fraser sockeye fishery.
Thank you, Ms. Netton.
Right, so this email came about in 2007 in August when we had low abundance of sockeye. We have two options really with regulations there. We can say no fishing for sockeye, or we can close the river to salmon fishing. Closing the river to salmon fishing is our last option. We know that that affects people because they have businesses, they have holidays, they have all those things Devona talked about planned, and it definitely affects the economics of the area as well as the social life of people. So it's definitely a last resort, and we prefer to go to no fishing for whatever species is in trouble so that anglers can fish for species that are not co-migrating species that are still more abundant. In this year, we just didn't have the flexibility to do that. We weren't meeting our obligations for First Nations, and we needed to make a change, and we went with no fishing for salmon in the area where this lodge was, and it did absolutely cause some consternation. This is one of the easier ones to respond to, actually, compared to many of the emails and letters we get on the subject. But it's definitely not something the department takes lightly, and this shouldn't have necessarily been a surprise in 2007 to Frank. We had weekly or bi-weekly information from the Pacific Salmon Commission that gives the run size. It shows where we're at with total allowable catch. That's distributed to many people, including the local committees in this area, of which I believe Frank at that time was a member. It wasn't a surprise to most people that we were going down this road. We were seeing runs not returning, and we did not have the ability to prosecute these fisheries. So.
And I'll move perhaps just to continue in this discussion through a few documents. Number 10 on the list, really by way of an example, we've had reference to the fishery notice. This is an example of a fishery notice. Now, the font is awfully, looks like a trick question now. Don't know if you can read that, but as I look at it, it seems to date to August 2009.
Yes, that is correct. So similar to 2007, in August of 2009, we had returns not meeting expectations, and we were at a point where we did not have any total allowable catch that would allow for recreational or commercial fisheries to take place. And in this case, we were saying, could you please Yeah, and please, not a regulation. Would you please fish more selectively than you have been? And we went with no fishing for sockeye, and we encouraged them to use one of the methods there to fish for this Chinook that were more abundant.
If the fishery notice could please be marked as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 520.
Number 11 in the book, on our list rather. Ms. Sneddon, this is an email that you sent to others within the department August of '09, and to read the start of it, folks, I need to express my concerns again regarding a short notice closure of the Fraser River to no fishing for salmon. We have an industry here that has the potential of 20 to 30,000 anglers. It is impossible to reach that level of participants in less than 24 hours. The next full paragraph, as I stated, we need to give them time to react to this news. Could you comment on those points that you made?
Yeah, okay, so August of 2009 is fairly vivid still. I think it was August 8th, we still were looking at a run size for summer run sockeye of 8.5 million. And then on Friday morning, we get together with the Pacific Salmon Commission and we get a run size of 600,000. And there was certainly a lot of panic within the department about what we needed to do in order to make sure we meet our conservation requirements. And then if we have any fish above that, that we're meeting our priorities for First Nations food social ceremonial. At the time this notice came out, the fishery in the Fraser River, which is a medium to high impact area because of the number of anglers that can access the fishery there, it was a non-retention of sockeye. So they could go out and fish for Chinook, they could catch sockeye and release them. And at this point, when we got to 600,000 summer run sockeye and we didn't have any available for the recreational fishery, we needed to make a change. And so was the change no fishing for sockeye, or was it no fishing for salmon? And that was a debate we had within the department. It was certainly my view, and as I expressed here, was that I would prefer to see it go to no fishing for sockeye, allow anglers to make the choice to support us and to fish more selectively using the gear types in that fishery notice that I mentioned so that they could target the more abundant Chinook. The debate going on was that, we needed to take drastic action and go to no fishing for salmon. And I said that, we really have a huge audience here. It's very hard for us to reach all these people. At, August 11th, it's a Friday night. People have already gone out to fishing bars. Lots of them are camping. It was 4:20. We hadn't even issued a notice yet, so businesses are closed. People are not paying attention to what's going on at this point. And I really were encouraging my colleagues that we needed to take some time and think about this a little more clearly before we went to a no fishing for salmon. In the end, we did go with no fishing for sockeye for a short period of time to try and allow anglers to change their behavior and just focus on fishing for Chinook.
And the department aims to provide 48 hours notice and not to close on a weekend? Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. So again, because of all the things I just mentioned, we definitely have an agreement with the recreational anglers on when we would close fisheries. We try to give them as much notice as possible, 48 hours, and again, not closing on a weekend. Conservation trumps everything. If we were at the stage where we were 100% certain and we knew the impact was so great, we would have closed it immediately. At that point, we were still allowed for some behavior changes, and we thought that this was the most risk-averse method at that time to go to was no fishing for sockeye.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
I would also just like to add something, if I may. It's not just the recreational community and the large numbers of participants that we're trying to reach. It's our own staff. We have fishery officers trying to enforce a fishery that folks may or may not know there's been a change. So in order to do this in an orderly manner, we have to develop these guidelines and principles, recognizing the unique nature of the recreational fishery in terms of the number of participants fishing in this area and all of the different access points. It's not logistically possible, short of having the Goodyear blimp fly over, notifying these folks. So we have to have time to get our own staff to be able to communicate and enforce as well.
To take you just to page 3, and I won't read this out apart from highly selectively, but this perhaps is an example, an email from Bill Otway, August 15, 2009. It uses words like underhanded, reprehensible, a total insult, cavalier. I take it that's an expression of some of the level of unhappiness about what happened in the summer of 2009?
Yes, absolutely. I said the email earlier from Frank Steger was certainly easier to respond to than this one. Bill, he definitely points out that in his view that the action was this way. In my response or in the department's response, I mean, we're very clear that this shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody either, other than, the surprise wasn't that we took action. The Pacific Salmon Commission comes up with a run size, we need to react to that.
Mm-hmm.
Sockeye is dynamic. It works that way. We don't just keep a fishery open because it's going to cause problems within the recreational fishery. Conservation comes first, followed by First Nations. But the comments from Bill are fairly common comments from recreational anglers when this type of activity takes place.
I would ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
522.
What I'd like to do, Mr. Commissioner, if it's agreeable, we usually break at 1:15. I have one other short section I expect that I can cover, and then I might suggest the break. These are questions on consultation. Ms. Adams, I'll direct them at you because I think most of them focus on the SFAB. And I won't try and have you explain the entirety of the consultative processes. If you could take the PPRs giving us some background. I'll first very quickly lead you through some documents. Number 13 on the list is entitled the Sport Fishing Advisory Board and Overview, and on page 2 of that document it provides a chart which sets out the organizational structure of the SFAB.
Yes, that's correct.
If this could be marked as an exhibit, please.
523.
Number 14 on our list is already an exhibit. It's Exhibit 421 in these proceedings. You'll recognize that as being the terms of reference for the SFAB.
Yes, that's correct. They were just approved January 2010.
The next item to be sure that we're thorough, number 15 on our list of exhibits, this is the comparable terms of reference but for the regional SFAC, Sport Fishing Advisory Committees.
That's correct. There's 3 levels of the advisory process.
Mr. Registrar, I'd ask this become the next exhibit, please.
524.
And number 16 on the list is the local Sport Fishing Advisory Committee's terms of reference. You recognize that?
Yes, I do. That's correct.
And Mr. Giles, if I could ask that, please be given an exhibit number as well.
The number again was?
Number 16 on our list,
16.
the local SFAC.
Thank you. It's
Terms.
525.
How it is that the department tries to consult with and have input from such a big and diverse and disparate group of people that make up the angling community.
The Sport Fishing Advisory Board was formed in 1964. It's, I believe, one of the oldest advisory processes, but it's gone through several revisions. And the most recent advisory board reflects a bottom-up approach. So we have 22 local committees. We then have a northern and a southern regional committee, and then a main board of British Columbia. The participants in the process range from independent anglers to businesses. And we try and balance through the terms of reference and the number of seats on the board, a balance between participants in the fishery who do not derive an income from the fishery and those who do. And we consider the people who do not derive an income from the fishery to be primary anglers, and those who derive a portion of their income to be considered secondary. And that's been approved through the advisory board's terms of reference.
And I take it that's to avoid those who are making money from the recreational sector dominating that process?
The recreational community as a whole, and this is through the Sport Fishing Advisory board's processes believe very strongly that the recreational fishery remain a public fishery, and in doing so they do not want the business interests to dominate the discussion or the agenda of their processes. The advisory boards meet twice a year. We have a post-season and a pre-season planning, and that's for all levels. And at those meetings, we're very cognizant, I think, as a group of department and recreational fishing community folks about the advice that we're getting and the different interests that are being brought forward.
How does the department support the SFAB, including with money?
The Department of Fisheries at the main board for British Columbia and at the regional boards, the north and the south, we provide travel funding and some per diem meal allowances to traveling participants.
People who are part of the SFAB do so on a volunteer basis, or at least they're not remunerated by the department?
That's correct.
Are there improvements to the SFAB process that any of the three of you would suggest? But Ms. Adams, I'll begin with you.
I think it works very well. These folks meet twice a year. I'm speaking at the main board. We have meetings on Saturdays and Sundays, so they're showing up. A lot of these folks are still working volunteers. They have their regular business jobs during the week, and we meet with them on weekends. And I think generally it works very well. They come to consensus agreement on most issues, but the process is governed by a voting procedure, and they use Robert's Rules of Orders, and very rarely do they come down to close votes. I would say most of their advice is based on consensus. They're able to reach that, but there's the odd one where they can't, and that will be recorded. Yeah, I think we get a really good cross-section of participation. They cover all species in marine waters and salmon in freshwater, and they try and cover off both operational issues as well as policy. An area that I would see an improvement needed is to have forums where specific important public policy discussions can happen. We're often looking at operational issues and don't have the time to discuss very important policy questions and issues.
Ms. Ned, anything to add?
Yes, I'm not going to talk about improvements so much as you talked about consultation in the Sportfish Advisory Board. In addition to these local boards, regional and main boards, we also have subcommittees, and we have a number of them. We have a SEP working group or subcommittee working groups. We have a Chinook and Coho one, and we have one specifically for sockeye, and we talk about sockeye, pink, and Chinook. And it meets weekly during the sockeye season. We have a pre-season, a post-season meeting, and then somewhere in mid-July we start meeting weekly, and we provide information through that process as well. And I think it works fairly effectively. Again, you know, with information changing very regularly on sockeye, generally 2 times a week, I send that information out to the groups, to the sockeye working group, but we don't meet until the Tuesday night the following week, unless there's an emergency that we need to get together for. And that sockeye working group is made up of members from both the marine waters and the freshwater, but it is predominantly freshwater representatives from the local committees.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, I've run a bit long. If we could move to the break, please.
Here to now recess for 15 minutes.